Good afternoon, everyone. It's me, Ivan Ramirez, Digital Experience Director, here with another episode of Ask an Educator. Today is one of those days that we are checking in with our storytellers. We are talking with Sylvia Ibarra Delgado. So let me bring her on stage. How are you, Sylvia?
Hi, thank you for having me, Ivan. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. I just got back home. Yeah, it's been a long day. How was your day?
Same. Long day, meetings, meeting up with people.
Yep. I also see our founder is watching our show, so I wanted to say hi to Edgar Palacios. But yeah, this is a time to check in with our Expression storytellers. We've talked to Emily Francis. We also have caught up with Melissa and other people. But before we start, I know a little bit about you, but I also want our community to get to know you. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, who are your people, and yeah, how you engage in your community?
Wonderful. So Sylvia Ibarra Delgado, born and raised in Chicago. I used to think that my narrative was unique, and in the last year, honestly, I've met a lot of people with a similar story. So, born in Chicago, when I was 9 months old, my parents decided that they wanted my older brother and I. He's 3 years older than me, 3.5. So he was 4, I was 9 months old. They wanted us to be raised in Mexico, to have a traditional upbringing, which I'm very grateful that they made that choice. I feel like that's why I've become the passionate bilingual educator that I am. Right, like it was part of my upbringing, and Spanish is my first language. Then, so that's what I thought used to be very unique, like born in the U.S. and then go back to Mexico or go back to homeland, right, and then come back. But in this last year, I've met so many people with very similar stories, and then we come back, right, and we have this privilege of being U.S. citizens, which I do not take lightly. I know that has given me many opportunities, and but also as children of immigrants, we carry that narrative, and what does that look like? And learning English as a second language when we were born here, and so carrying that story. Hi, Edgar. Good to see you.
Good to see you all. First and foremost, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm actually really excited. It's been a long time since I've been on one of these formats. And so I was like, Yvonne, can you put me in today? I just want to get back into the practice of talking to folks in our community and just being a part of the conversation. I appreciate you letting me crash.
Always welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you have a question, Edgar, to get us started. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, Sylvia, as you're talking about like identity and privilege, I actually was just in Indianapolis, and it was really interesting. It's a new community for us to be engaged in person, and it was really cool to see just folks that like were excited about being together and being in space. But something that we were talking about was just this idea of the different kind of types of Latinidad, right? The different
Mhm.
types of ways that we show up as a community. And so I'm curious about like um, your thoughts on as Latinos, like how do we retain our individual identity, right? But then also how do we coalesce with the larger group of folks? So for example, I'm Nicaragüense by heritage, right? I know I have a lot of Central American friends. I have a lot of Mexican friends. And so just curious around your thoughts around like being Nicaragüense, being celebratory of that, and also recognizing that I'm part of a larger community.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind for me is empathy, and right, like I mentioned, being a U.S. citizen, that's a privilege. I also like being in Chicago and being Mexican American. I also think I recognize that as a privilege of like my people are go to La Villita, go to Pilsen, right? Like you, I see my culture reflected back to me, and I think that's where the empathy piece comes in. Then when I think about my Cuban friends, my Colombian friends, right? I know what it's like for them to feel like, oh, everybody assumes I'm Mexican because I live in Chicago, right? And so I think for me, it's Latinidad is and ensuring that everybody is seen and felt part of the conversation. Um, unfortunately, right? Like depends on where you're at in this. We do have this common language. It's a beautiful language now, but right, like it is a language that we learned from colonizers. So we all share Spanish. And then how do we bring that together of let's not continue to divide each other up again. And then right, like and then we start if we dig even deeper and to talk about colorism and how we class has already separated us. And so I think it's just ensuring and then Ivan, I think you were probably starting to touch on this too, of also talking about Latinx Heritage Month, and right, and then there's also a conversation: is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? Is it Latina? Latinx? Like, there's so many aspects that we can continue to talk about, but overall, it's just embracing each other, celebrating each other's culture, and honestly, enjoying it over delicious food. Right? Everybody's gonna fight like, oh no, arroz con gandules, no, el arroz mexicano, right? Like we're all gonna fight. Our arroz is better, and it's all perspective, but ultimately, it's celebrate each other instead of tearing each other down.
I was about to throw down there. I was going to be like, you can't be fritanga. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I
Right.
appreciate that. And I think that that is, I was talking to Yvonne earlier this week about just the terminology, right? And I understanding that language has evolved, language continues to evolve. And also, like, sometimes it feels like a distraction, right? Of the other challenges that Latinos as a community either face or like as a distraction to like what's possible as when we come into collective power, right? And it's not to dismiss somebody's identity or their connection to it, but it is to say that like dividing ourselves within the community is also not going to be helpful, right? And so, how are we finding connection points across lines of difference and ensuring that we offer the best of each of us in these conversations, and we remain thoughtful around like just the diversity of our community, right? It's I'm constantly reminded about there is no one right way to be Latino,
Right.
uh, but there are multiple ways of doing it, and so I appreciate that. So you mentioned La Villita, you mentioned Pilsen. um, I assume you've been to the museum in Pilsen.
Were you overhearing our conversation or pre-conversation?
Oh,
We talked about the museum. Yeah, just
okay,
now.
Yeah, we were
awesome.
just talking about the Mexican Museum in Chicago, which they're doing something really exciting this weekend for the Day of the Dead.
Yeah, shameless plug. It doesn't benefit me at all, but it's great. The tomorrow, I think it's 9 to 3 in Harrison Park. They're going to have an event, and different organizations are going to have altares for Dia del Muerto. It's just a beautiful experience.
There's a comment, Sofia, part of our community. We have to stay unified in the comunidad. So, hello, Sofia.
Thank you, Sophia.
It's so awesome to see our storytelling fellows in community with each other as well. So, what are you excited about?
For the museum, sorry, I'm just trying to keep track.
Just in general, like what's as you like continue to learn how to tell your story and practice it and put it in place and connecting with others, like what is that? Are there possibilities and openings that are coming to you?
I think what I'm excited about is just honestly standing in my own strength, right? I think right putting in my identity Latina, and I'm not the eldest in my family, but I'm the eldest daughter, right? And I think right knowing what comes into play of like always looking out for others and being the responsible one and looking after other people, I learned to put myself at the bottom of the totem pole, right? And so I think now as an adult, calling out those behaviors and unlearning and knowing that I can put myself as a priority and that's not selfish, right? And so what I'm excited about is owning my strengths. And I've also, through that, I've learned that I'm a very good connector in regards to if somebody is looking for XYZ opportunity or XYZ resource, I'm very good at connecting either individuals with other individuals or just say, hey, I've been in this spot before. I have, for example, a conversation that came up today. I was like, oh, I have the study guide, a new, and so something to go back to the original question, something I'm excited for is I started as like an adjunct professor that will start next semester. So I'm very excited for that. That's very new, right? So a challenge for me, but also consulting with National Louis University to help them develop their program and their curriculum for bilingual educators. And so earlier today, I had a meeting with a student. She's doing her student teaching practice, and she just mentioned, I'm feeling nervous about, I don't know all, she's a native speaker, Spanish is her first language, but she mentioned, I'm nervous about the technical academic terms. And I was like, great, I have a resource I can share with you. So I think it's just owning that and being excited for others and for myself and the knowledge that I can continue to share.
I also think it's for me it's really powerful to hear like this ability like for people to share if like this is what I'm nervous about or this is something that I'm unsure of and being able to have resources available to them, people available to them to support their growing in their journey. Ryan, you have any questions? I don't want
No,
to speak the conversation, but you know.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions that have to do with storytelling. I also want to hear about your story in our community, to hear your story with in education. But yeah, can you share briefly about your leadership story as a student, and now how has shaped you as a professional?
Yeah. So as a student, honestly, my two, and I share these with the teachers I help develop, and my colleagues know these stories because it's an important part of who I am, and I openly share this because it's important that as educators we change that narrative. My two earliest memories related to education are negative. One is where my white monolingual teacher is separating, like she grabbed my, it wasn't physical violence, but like definitely created different traumas, right? So she's physically separating me from my bilingual buddy. So therefore, like my lifeline, as I'm in first grade, don't know English, and so literally physically being separated, and so the impact of that. And then second memory, also in first grade, is the bilingual co-teacher in the room who speaks Spanish, who's there to help, right, students like me. I wrote my name Sylvia Ibarra Flores. My mother's maiden name is Flores, right? Coming from Mexico, I had done kinder in Mexico, and like that is how my family chose that I would identify myself. That's how I was used to writing my name. So I would write Sylvia Ibarra Flores, and then the bilingual co-teacher literally erased it, like grabbed a pencil, erased Flores, and she says, we don't do that in this country. And again, being a 6-year-old first grader, and this is a person of authority, I'm going to listen. And like from that day forward, I became Sylvia Ibarra, and not realizing until an adult and until I was stepping into classrooms the impact of that. And so now definitely embracing when families have two names, ensuring that our documents are updated correctly, so that can be reflected for them, because it is who they are. It's literally your name. And embracing that for them so that they can feel comfortable in sharing both last names and not want to say, oh, well, most kids only have one last name. I'm going to decide that I only say this. And also advocating for them, and telling them, tell your teachers how to say your name correctly, so that it's not anglicized, and owning that and sitting in that and feeling pride with your name. I deviated a little bit, but that's why I got into education. Now 12 years working in education, 7 years in the classroom. I've done monolingual settings, bilingual settings, and dual language. And then my last year in the classroom was actually in a monolingual setting, and ultimately it was a great year. The kids were great, but I just knew I needed to go back to bilingual education, and luckily I was able to do that within KIP. And then from there we've grown from simply an ESL program to a full bilingual program, with hopes in the coming years to be able to expand to dual language.
That's funny. Earlier, Edgar and I went somewhere, and then there was a guy, and then his boss introduced him to us with the English pronunciation. So we sat down, like, "Hey, is your name really this, or is it in the Spanish pronunciation?" He said, "No, it is this, Sebastian." But just the
Yeah.
even as an adult, we really we want to be seen, and then we want that representation, like his face, everything changed. That yeah, our
Yes.
name is the basis of who we are, and it speaks why. And then I also want to get your thoughts why representation is important in the classroom.
Yeah. Um, sorry, my phone. Everybody, of course, is just trying to call right now. So if you see me a little moving to the side, I'm just trying to deny all the calls. Um, why representation matters. I think it's very important, right? It's I mean it's lonely when nobody really understands who you are, and I've been in those settings. I was very fortunate that the first two schools that I worked at, we were very representative of what our students look like, and I think that created a home for me. So I first taught 2 years in Milwaukee, then 2 years in San Antonio before coming back home to Chicago. And Milwaukee and San Antonio were very representative of our students, and it was also right. Like I also saw myself in the staff. We were able to create strong friendships, and it became a family away from home. And honestly, I think right, like being away from my home city, that's also what I needed. And it's people that I'm still in contact and consider lifelong friends. I think when I came home, I had this beautiful vision of everything's going to be great. I'm in my home city. I'm going to teach where like I came from and I understand students. But it was the first setting where it was a predominantly white staff, and I think that's where then I didn't necessarily feel welcome with open arms, and it was conversations that needed to be had. And honestly, it was microaggressions as simple as not saying good morning. And I had a lot of conversations with people about this. I was like, oh well, it's a cultural thing. I was like, no, you can greet a human being, right? Like that's not cultural. That's just we're coworkers. Acknowledge my existence. Acknowledge my presence at your side. And it's just good manners. That's not a cultural thing. It's just you acknowledge the human being next to you. And so right, and how do you it's very lonely if you're experience that day in day out and don't have anybody else to turn to. And right, and if you're new in a workplace and don't know who to go to. So that's why I do think it's important that and again across identities, right? um turn to your black colleagues, turn to somebody who may be experiencing something similar or can guide you and say, hey, I need some support in having this conversation. Can you practice, can you role play this conversation with me so that I can feel comfortable as I have this conversation? And again, is it easy? No. Does it get better after each conversation? I think little by little, but it's also not going to be a change from one day to the next.
You're right. It does get lonely, in which we know educators are leaving, especially Latinx educators. So there's less of us. Within 3 years, Latinx educators tend to leave. So it's getting even more lonely in schools, especially for Latinx educators. But why do you think, and what advice could you give to those educators that might be thinking of leaving the profession, or they think that it might not be for them?
Yeah. And right, like it's sorry. Yep, my husband's about to come in. Okay. And I think it's find your lifelines, right? Like find your support group, find other educators who are going through it, just so that you don't have to go through this alone. And I think it also ultimately like don't burn yourself out. Find the resources so that it's not an all day work, right? Like I've been in the settings where it's like you're working all day, you're working during prep, and then you go home and you continue working, right? And so if we continue that cycle, we're just going to burn ourselves out, and we need to be our best selves in front of students so that they get quality educators day in day out. And so I think that's one. It's find the connections to find the resources, and I think two, it's you have to be vocal about what you need, because I've seen several situations where it's you know what, I'm done. this situation is too frustrating, moving on. And then somebody submits the resignation, and afterwards they're like, oh, I wish if you would have told me, we could have done this and this. So I think my number one thing is be vocal. You can be so upset, you can be all of this, but if somebody doesn't know how you're feeling, there's nothing that can be changed. And I'm not saying those conversations are easy, right? And again, that's why I also say, like, find your support group and have a practice conversation and role play that out. But you have to tell somebody that it's not okay so that something can change. Don't just walk away without having the conversation.
I'm curious. So you have been in education for a while. What has kept you? What drives you to stay around in the profession?
Day in, day out, it's kids and families, honestly. Right? Like, I know the narrative. I remember growing up and helping my mom study for her citizenship test, right? So we need people who are helping make decisions on how are we helping students and families. Yes, academically, but how are we also serving them? I can't expect you to get 100% on all your tests and just be this like academic machine and then go home to face other obstacles, right? How am I creating a system that is supportive of what students and families need, so that they can come the next day to school and do their best, right? So it's not just, okay, for example, like donations, right? Like, what do families need? Do they need furniture? Do they need clothes? Like, having certain events throughout the year that we've partnered with, right? So doing coat drives. Just 2 weeks ago, we had I will say this is a proud moment. We had an event with KIP Chicago. We gave families a minimum of 3 to 4 clothing items, new coats for kids. And there was workshops for the families, and then we closed the event with a mariachi. And that honestly was like 4 years in the making. I think when our program shifted to ESL, to bilingual, and the demographics of our schools changed, that I remember in 2018, I was like, I want to bring a mariachi. But we all know mariachi is expensive. And so luckily 4 years later, like, and again, right, like collaboration, this was across departments, across teams. It was just, hey, actually, let's frame the event this way. Let's do this. And like, let's find the correct budget line. Honestly, it was a beautiful moment. Families were happy. Families were dancing on our auditorium stage with the mariachi. Tears were shed, as typically are cuando canta el mariachi, right? But it was a beautiful moment for families. And I do think that's why it's important that people of all identities, right, like educators of color, stay, so that students know, hey, I have somebody rooting in my corner for me, for my family, and who understands what I am going through.
Ivan and I are playing chicken to see who asks the next question.
Well, mine is related to storytelling. I don't know if you're gonna
Oh, no.
oh.
I'm just I love hearing that, and I think it's something that affirms for me is this, just the importance of being seen, right? And the importance of being heard, right? I'm also connecting to the previous comment, just around like this idea of being vocal. And something that I'm struggling with is, I think some of the narratives that we have within our own community or about our own community, right, in which often like our voices aren't heard, right? And we say, particularly like when we're at, I hear a lot of like Latino families aren't engaging, Latino families aren't showing up, Latino families are not like providing their opinions and things like that. And my question then becomes like, well, is it Latinos who are the issue as a community, or are we not doing enough to create the spaces, the invitations that are needed in order to engage the community authentically, right? Like, how do we go from potentially dismissing, overlooking people, and then blaming them when we want them to show up, but they don't? So I'm curious if you have thoughts on that. And I'm curious if that relates to any of the storytelling questions as well, Ivan.
Automatically, right? Like, okay, so then if the narrative is Latino families are not XYZ, or they're not submitting this and they're not doing this, then it's okay, let's go back. and look at and examine the protocol, right? Like maybe the protocol just isn't Spanish speaking friendly, right? Like, are you paying for a translator that's using very formal language that is not how our families speak, right? And a tangible example that I can think of too is on the onset of the pandemic, right? Everything went virtual and send families a survey. And I was like, no, 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 that's not going to happen. You need to if you want everything to go electronic, then like we need to teach the families how to do it. You can't just expect, I'm going to send you this link, you know how to open it, you know how to fill it out. Like for example, I can think of an exact conversation where when everything went on Google Classroom, I literally had to tell the family what the Google Classroom app icon looked like, right? For them to be able to click it. So I think you have to examine your procedures and to say, is this accessible to everyone, or is it accessible to me and this is how I'm used to learning, so therefore everybody else can meet me there. And we have to do the reverse of where am I going to meet the most marginalized communities.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing that. My question is, in regards to storytelling, what does engaging in storytelling as a practice of freedom mean to you? We talked about this a while back in the spring, but yeah.
I think it's sitting in your experiences and knowing that they have value. I've also been in at different stages of my life where it's like, you know what, mejor me quedo atrás. I'm just going to be at the back. Like, I'll be quiet. I don't want to share this because it's different than the norm. Or like, I remember being in high school and it's, I want to dress like everybody else because I just want to blend in. And so connecting that to education and part of storytelling. And then I think teachers have the power to have those conversations with students, right? And say, I understand the peer pressure to want to blend in right now, but your individual identity, like what makes you unique, is who you are, and it's going to set you apart from everybody else, right? And so how do you sit with that? And so I think if freshman-year-old 15-year-old Sylvia would have had somebody, right, that looked like her and said, it's okay that you right now are battling through these differences, but I need you to like stick to who you are, right? I think I would have read all the novels that I read in college a lot. I would have read them 4 years earlier. Like, for example, I took French because I was like, oh, yes, español. I don't need to do that, right? And yes, I already knew Spanish at that point, but am I using my French? No, I just wasted 3 years when I could have taken an AP Spanish class, right? Like, saved myself some money, read amazing novels at a younger age, right? Like, and had just more opportunities to explore my own identity versus I pushed it 4 years down the road until I got to college, right? So I think that's where it's important to be able to see ourselves in educators and to have somebody rooting for us and making decisions at the top too, not just in the classroom. And I think it's just education overall.
How have you gone to share your story? Have you empowered students? What has happened after the fellowship?
So after the fellowship, I connect with students and families often. I would say students know my story. Eighth graders, I would say, right, like the 7th and 8th graders, I get to connect a little more, and because they're the ones that are like, oh, my mom just doesn't get it, and I'm like, okay, siéntate, let's talk, right? Like, because mom does get it. I think somewhere down the line, you don't get it, and let me tell you what's going on. But just sharing my story, I think ultimately with students, right? Like they're who I'm keeping in my heart, but also with the teachers that I help develop, and right, like me being in their corner and knowing like, I know what you're feeling. I know that this is hard. And if we're going to change the narrative, like we have to work through this together and be patient with it. And again, I'm going to go back to continue to have the difficult conversations because we need to hold people accountable for making that change. And I think it's just being more comfortable in sharing in who I am. I would consider myself, I'm absolutely an introvert. That's 100%. But I think the storytelling experience has pushed me, and that's also why I also signed up, right? Like I need that push to be able to share my experiences and know that there's value in my ups and in my downs, equally.
I'm curious, what is like a piece of advice or wisdom that resonates with you, and that you offer on to like future generations?
This is taking me back like 10 years. So I'm very much of like, visualize your goals, right? Like visualize you already achieving that goal, right? So if you want to graduate college, right? Visualize yourself crossing the stage, and then like actively work towards that goal, right? And then teaching terms, backwards plan. What do I need to do to get to that goal? And so the reason why I say it takes me back 10 years, I was having this conversation and somebody once told me, don't fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it, right? So like, tell yourself, I'm a confident person, right? Like, even if you're not, tell yourself, I am a confident person, until you internalize it, right? And again, are taking actions to get to that goal. So I think that's what I always come down to, is like, fake it till you become it, because you will be in it, embrace it, and then you go to the next goal, and then we move forward, because along that trajectory, right? Like, you've become that, you've owned that, you've earned those skills, and you didn't even realize it because it's become so second nature to you.
So, what are you envisioning for 10 years from now?
10 years from now, I would like 3 letters in front of my name, Doctora Sylvia Ibarra Delgado, within bilingual education, within research for immigration, and what language learning looks like. I think historically, right, like by the 3rd generation, the home language is lost. I would love to see updated research, because unfortunately, I think it's going quicker than the 3rd generation nowadays. So I would love to be able to be immersed in that research.
I think, yeah. Edgar took my last question. What kept you going? What words of advice you have for your students? But yeah, I don't have any more questions. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Thank you again. Thank you for the space. And I would say ending advice for students is, if your goal's not, if your goal doesn't scare you, it's not big enough, right? So it's challenge yourself to meet that goal, believe in yourself, and you can do it. And I think it's just, you have to have that support group. You don't have to do it by yourself. And I would also say something I am continuing to unlearn is ask for help. You don't have to do anything by yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Edgar, for showing up. Sylvia, thank you for being here with us in Ask an Educator. And then catch the next episode, or go back to our YouTube channel to see the previous interviews with our colleagues and different educators across the region, across the nation. So thank you all. We'll see you next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Edgar. Bye.